Welcome to Art Ed Radio, the podcast for art teachers. This show is produced by the Art of Education, and I'm your host, Tim Bogatz. In today's episode, we are going to talk about the changing environment when it comes to our teaching and how we as art teachers can adapt to change. Because change is something that every teacher experiences, but the pace of change and the shape and the feel of that can be very different depending on when you started teaching. You know, if you began your career, say, a decade ago, okay, the classroom that you walked into then may feel very different from the one that you teach in today. Okay? If you've only been there a couple years, it's probably more minimal. If you've been there, I started in 2002, and the classroom differences there are incredibly big. And I think the way we can adapt to those changes, the way we deal with those changes, can go a long way in how successful we are and how successful we feel as teachers. And because they're constantly shifts in technology and student habits and how students approach problem solving and all of these things create new challenges for teachers. So today I want to bring on Khadesia Latimer to talk about a lot of these things with me. Khadesia is very popular on Instagram at the Busy Brushes. And she's been with us for the Now conference multiple times, and for some reason has never been on the podcast, but I wanted to bring her on because she was actually at the last Now conference this winter, and we had the live roundtable about how teachers adapt to change, very similar topic to what we're doing today. And unfortunately, we had some technology issues, and we didn't hear from Khadesia as much as we would have liked to. So I really want to give her the floor today, give her the episode today to talk about all these things, because I think she has some good perspectives on, what those shifts that I just talked about look like in the art room. And she has some good ideas on how teachers can help students think about their own confidence, how they approach things as thinkers, as problem solvers. And she has a lot of ideas about collaboration and team building and how to get students brainstorming and how to get them to think for themselves and to do things for themselves. And so we'll talk about all that, as well as how we can personally navigate those changes that come at us as our teachers. So a lot to talk about. Let me go ahead and bring her on now. Joining me now is Khadesia Latimer. Khadesia, how are you?
I am doing great. Tim, how are you?
I'm doing great also. I feel like we've known each other forever, but I don't think you've ever been on the podcast before. So welcome to the show, first of all, I guess. And then secondly, can you tell people a little bit about you or your teaching or whatever else you want to share?
Yeah, absolutely. First off, I want to say I love the podcast and I'm
Thank you.
excited to be on it. I love it. My name is Khadesia Latimer, and I am an elementary art teacher from upstate South Carolina. Next year will be my 10th year in education.
Nice.
I cannot believe it. But I have learned a lot along the way, and I'm still learning at year 10. So I'm very excited to start year 10 next year. And we have spring break coming up very soon, and I am extremely excited.
Everybody's looking forward to spring break. Like,
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
the good stuff. But we love what we do, but we also like to be able to step away from it every once in a while.
Or make our own things.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Exactly. So now I wanted to have you on the podcast because you were part of the roundtable at the Art Ed Now conference back in January, but we had some technical issues. We did not get to hear from you as much as we wanted to, but we were talking about, how we deal with change as teachers, how we adapt to things. And so I wanted to kind of continue that conversation with you here. And my first question for you is, When you compare teaching now to back when you started 10 years ago, what are some of the biggest changes that you've seen? And like how have things changed maybe post-pandemic or how have things changed just in the past few years for you?
Yeah, well, I started teaching the summer of 2017, and I feel like back then students could brainstorm. They could actually brainstorm on their
Mm,
own, and they
yeah.
were really well at working in groups. And I've noticed over the years that has changed, and I'm glad you brought up the pandemic. I know a lot of times we blame things on the pandemic,
Yeah.
but I can say, having experienced that, coming back, students didn't really know how to work together anymore. I feel like after being, stuck at home for so long, and just the transition of getting back into school was really rough for some students.
Mm,
I feel like we kind of lost that. And as a parent, I also can say I believe that a lot of parents nowadays are what I like to call easy parenting, which means that we are, and I'm guilty of it too. I've done it. I have a 5-year old. We're really bad at sometimes doing things for kids because it's faster in the name of just getting it done. I know I did
yep.
that with my daughter myself. I am guilty, so I'm not blaming anyone. And I feel like that's happened a lot over the years just because life can be hectic and sometimes it's just easy to do it for them. And
Yeah.
they lost that confidence to do things themselves or to think about things for themselves. And so a lot of times I'll have simple issues in the classroom, like a student will come in and they won't have a stool at their seat, and they'll just kind of stand there and look at me and say, I don't have a stool. And for me, I would come in, I'll say, oh, I don't have a stool. Let me go grab an empty one. Like it's just that
Yeah.
simple for me. But I have yet to have a student do that. A lot of times they just will stand there until I tell them to go grab one or give them the idea to look around the room and see if there's an empty spot. And so it's just even the small things that they don't take out the time to think about or feel confident enough to solve on their own.
Yeah, I don't know. kind of feel bad laughing about that because it is a very real issue. But then when you try and tell somebody who's a non-teacher about that, like they'll look at you like you're crazy. But it is like those are the things that are
Yes.
happening in our classroom right now.
Yes, and I hear a lot of teachers talking about that, and there's a term for it, learned helplessness. It's happened so often that there's a term for it. We've learned to become helpless in all aspects.
So let me ask you this then. If kids are struggling with, thinking through those things, struggling with problem solving now, like what are some things, besides that sort of think aloud or like, hey, maybe you could
Mhm.
look around the room, those suggestions, what are some other things that you tried in the art room to help students kind of rebuild that independence or rebuild that confidence?
Yeah, that's funny. My husband is a teacher too, and we were having this conversation yesterday at dinner time because even in with his high school students, he's noticing it with them too. And we had a conversation about how I think it's called, yeah, project-based learning. Am I saying that right?
Mm,
Yes.
yeah, yeah.
Project-based learning used to be a really big thing when I started in education. And I know it was mostly centered around science, but I used to find ways to incorporate it into my classroom, kind of combining science with art. So I remember one time we were making the strongest sculpture using, you know, marshmallows and spaghetti noodles, like dried spaghetti.
Yeah,
We would do
yeah.
things like that all the time, and it was fun. And they had to actually work together and think about it. And I have to admit that over the years, I've kind of shied away from doing those types of projects. One, because it's expensive.
Right.
Two, it's time consuming. But I feel like I stopped doing it because of those reasons and because I felt like the classroom teachers were doing it. But I've noticed over the years, classroom teachers don't do it anymore either
Mhm.
because they've been encouraged to try to get as much content into their students' brains as possible before testing and before diagnostics that it's not essential anymore because it takes up too much time. And so now that they're
Right.
not doing this type of problem solving together, they don't know how because they haven't practiced that skill. And so I think one thing I'm going to try to do is try to incorporate those types of projects back into the classroom because it is something that is absolutely missing. And I feel like in order for them to learn how to brainstorm, they've got to be given opportunities to actually brainstorm. And we
Yeah.
do that in art, of course. I feel like we do that in art all the time. But I think like actually presenting a problem to them and saying, hey, come up with the solution.
Yeah, I like that because like you said, it's inherent in what we do. Like, every art class is naturally going to be doing things like that, but kids need that opportunity to have it made explicit and they need to learn how to do that. And so I
Hmm.
like the idea of just, teaching them how, teaching them the basics of brainstorming and collaborating because like you said, they may not be getting it other places. And it's great if we can be the ones to teach them those things. Preferably we're not the only ones.
Yes.
We can do it really well. So I think that's a good idea to bring those sorts of things into the art room.
Yeah.
Now, I also wanted to come back to the idea of change. You were talking a little bit about how maybe curriculum is changing, how students are changing. I want to talk about us as teachers. So, can you describe maybe your own mindset when it comes to change? Like, what is your thinking or your habits that maybe allow you to stay open to adapting and changing things rather than being resistant to change?
That is a good question. I'm going to be 1000% honest. I do not like change at
Okay,
all.
fair,
And
fair.
I'm a human, so I am not perfect. I do not like change at all. As my granny would say, I am very set in my ways. So much so that if I pull into the parking lot at school and somebody's in my spot, my unassigned assigned spot, I'm a little bit upset. I am slightly upset, but you know what? Change is a part of life, and I'll be 32 in April. And I'm
Mhm.
learning that that's just a part of life, and you have to roll with the punches. And so I've even had to learn myself how to deal with that and how to have a positive mindset when it comes to thinking about change. And so I often remind myself that change encourages growth. And so if I want to grow in something, I have to be okay with change.
Yep.
And being an art teacher over the years, I have learned that you kind of just have to roll with it. Sometimes things change every second, every minute. The whole
Hmm.
day may change depending on what's going on. And you kind of have to learn how to adapt to that because that's just a part of life. We have to learn how to be open and be positive about it. If we get in the mindset that if something changes, we're going to be upset, we're going to be upset for a very long time.
Very well said.
Yeah, we're going to
Well,
be upset for a very long time. And so I don't want to be that way. So I just have to remember that it encourages growth for sure.
yeah, I think a lot of veteran teachers could probably be reminded of that message,
Mhm.
myself included. 'Cause, I've got some years on you, and just seeing those changes come through, and especially seeing colleagues who've been teaching even longer than me watch those changes come through, and there's never a positive thing to say about them, which I can
Mm.
understand because a lot of times it's just stuff that's being repackaged from 15 years ago, just with different name, different presentation. But I think it is good advice for all of us to kind of be open-minded, see if there are areas for growth, see if there are
Mhm.
ways for us to get a little bit better at what we do. And I think that's a good reminder for people.
Right. And I think that change also encourages us to learn too, right? So
Mhm.
if you start in education year 1 and everything stays exactly the same year after year after year 1, it's not going to be very interesting to you anymore. And I feel like the only way we become better teachers is if we're introduced to things that we have to learn how to change and adapt. If we stay the same the entire time, we're not learning anything. And teachers should
Absolutely.
continue to learn too.
So, speaking of continuing to learn, I'd love to know what you see coming in the future. Like, when it comes to the teaching profession, like, what changes do you see coming in the next maybe 5 or 10 years? And how do we get ready for that? Like, how do we prepare for those changes?
That's interesting. I think right now, what stands out to me the most is artificial intelligence,
Mm.
AI, and how
Yep.
it's being kind of pushed into education along with other things, especially though in art, because we have the AI art, right? And
Mhm.
how is that affecting real artists out here who are actually making artwork, even with music? They're AI artists. I'm
Oh,
learning
I
that.
know. Like, top
Yeah.
in the country charts right now.
Yes, absolutely. And that's very interesting. These aren't real people. And so I'm concerned about how that's going to affect the arts, one. What is that going to look
Mhm.
like? Because I don't see it going away. I will admit that I don't see it going away. I think it's here to stay. So I'm concerned about that, and just our use of AI. There are some things that come along with it that could potentially be damaging. I don't know if 10 years from now we're going to see it just yet, but we've already started to see environmental racism in some spaces where they're building these data centers and it's polluting the environment.
Mhm.
And then I personally can see already how it's affecting how our students think.
Yeah.
If they can just plug into AI and let AI do the work and turn it in, we're not even encouraging critical thinking, and that's so important. So
Right.
I'm a little uneasy about that. I won't say uneasy. I'm interested to see how that will play out. Of course, just like I said a while ago, we have to be positive. I do think there are some positive things about artificial intelligence, and I do think that if we learn how to use it appropriately, um, it could be positive, but right now we're trending towards not using it that way.
Yeah,
So
that's fair. And you say we need to remain positive, but I also think it's fair to be critical, especially if you're thinking deeply about these things. I think you need to be able to, like you said, think critically and in the best terms, if you can be positive and take some of the benefits away, like that's wonderful. But if everything
Mhm.
you're seeing is harmful, you don't have to be positive just for the sake of positivity. Just changing it up and figuring out how we can work with these things, or how we can help students learn to deal with these things can be really worthwhile.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree with that. I think sometimes we get caught up in the positive toxicity of life in general. Just we always have to be
Yeah.
positive, but sometimes you're right. Sometimes we just have to say this is not working,
Hmm.
and we probably need to look into how we can make this better. Because again, I don't see it going away, but we're not being very responsible.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. So I want to talk a little bit more about what you said, just like preparing our students, and you mentioned critical thinking, but I think it goes beyond that too. And just thinking about new technology, but also all of the other changes, all of the other things that kids are dealing with right now, like not only technology, but social pressures and just the constant bombardment of information and advertising and all of the things that they're seeing online, seeing in everyday life. So sorry, I feel like I'm just kind of ranting there, but the
I
question
know.
is, with all of those changes, like how can we help students deal with that? How can we do things in the art realm to help them build resilience and build adaptability to everything that's being thrown at them?
Yes, when you were explaining that, the first thing I thought about cell phones and how even as young as 5 at my school, some of my students have
Oh,
cell phones.
yeah.
Uh, and I think that is very harmful. I
Mhm.
didn't have a cell phone until I was in the 8th grade. And honestly, I'll have to say I don't know if I would give an 8th grader a phone right now. And now the phone that I had was not an iPhone. I had a phone that I
Yeah.
could just text. The pictures you could barely see them. So it was a different time. But I am very fearful of just giving this type of this amount of technology, this amount of information to young minds because they do not have the skills right now to be able to use that safely.
Yeah.
Even if we have the apps and the things like that, there's so many kids are very smart when it comes to getting around things. And I don't think we just need to rely on those to keep them safe. And so I think that's the first thing that I think about
Yeah.
because I see a lot of drama. That drama starts like in the 3rd grade now because of
Yeah.
these phones.
Unfortunately,
Yeah,
yes.
things like that. So like those social pressures. And so I think one way we can build resilience and adaptability is actually to like have conversations with students. I remember when I first started teaching, sometimes we would just come into the room, I would sit up at the front and we would just talk. Like we would just talk. So sitting there and saying, "Hey, how was everybody's weekend? What happened? Does anybody have any concerns right now?" I remember I used to do that a lot. And I think that we're missing that in the classroom because people are afraid that they may say the wrong thing, encourage the wrong thing, or may find out too much information that may make them uneasy. But I feel like
Mhm.
that's missing. Kids need to have conversations with adults, whether if that's at school with your teacher or if you have a therapist. But I feel like we need to have meaningful conversations with students. And right now we're just kind of passing by, I feel like sometimes. I think another really good way to have these conversations is through picture books. I would say this until the end of time. Even in college, my college professor used to read picture books to us. And it was even profound then to like stop, think about the book, have a conversation about it. What did you get from this?
Yeah.
And that was in college. So just imagine how impactful it can be with elementary students, middle school, even middle school. We should be reading picture books to middle school.
Okay, so let me ask you, like, do you have, not to put you on the spot here, but do you have suggestions for books that you really like to read or you think have good lessons for kids?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I love Peter Reynolds. I have almost
Mm,
every one of his books, and I love that he has the series that kind of talk about these values. So I encourage the Book of Resilience. That's a really good one. Of
mm.
course, the good old classics, The Dot and Ish are really
Oh,
good.
can't go wrong with those.
Cannot go wrong. My first year teaching, our principal gave us a copy of The Most Magnificent Thing. It's about a little girl who's trying to invent something and it doesn't work several times. And so she has to try several
Mm,
times to make it work. Jabari jumps. He's afraid and he has to push through. He has to make it happen. So I think that we should introduce those books back into the classrooms even more and actually have conversations about them. That would definitely
yeah.
help.
Yeah, there's a lot there as far as can be learned. And yeah, I've never thought about, reading picture books to like secondary
Mhm.
students. Maybe I should. Maybe there are a lot of people out there doing that already, but that's not something I was aware of, but I really like the idea. So thank you
Thank you.
for sharing that. And I guess to kind of wrap up, I appreciate all of these ideas, all of these suggestions that you've given, but to wrap it up, like, do you have an idea, a resource, takeaway, just something that you think teachers should think about and take back to their own art making or their own art room when it comes to resilience, adaptability, dealing with change, or honestly just doing the best we can as teachers?
Yeah, for art teachers specifically, this is kind of bouncing off the last question, so it kind of answers both. But allowing more choice in the classroom, I feel like will build
Mhm.
confidence in students. I know there's like a conversation in the art community about the cookie cutter projects versus the projects that
Right,
offer more choice, and
right.
everybody has their feelings about them. Honestly, I can say I feel like there's a place for both. But I also think that if we continue to make all choices, they're never going to know how to make a choice on their own. So I feel like if we take some of our control away in the name of just giving them an opportunity to choose for themselves in all
Mhm.
ways, let them choose, even if it's just for a project, just to try it out and see, but let them choose absolutely everything, make them think. I think providing more choice in the classroom would definitely help, and I think they would be more comfortable with thinking for themselves if they're allowed to do that more. And that's something I'm even working on, and I noticed that they enjoy it more.
Okay. I love that. Like I said, I think it goes back to the parenting thing you were talking about way back at the beginning of the conversation, where, sometimes it does just feel easier to do things for them. But
Hmm.
uh, then there is the argument to be made that they're going to learn more when they are doing things for themselves. So
Yeah.
I
And
like,
I like that you said it's easier. It really is just easier for us, right?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. So no, I think that's something really good that everybody can think about, and I think this whole conversation gives everyone a lot to think about. So, Khadijah, thank you so much for finally coming on the show and finally joining me. This has been a great conversation, and I've loved talking to you.
Yes, thank you for allowing me to come. Thank you.
All right, thank you to Khadijah for coming on and sharing all of those ideas with us. I think that, there's a few things that stand out. As we said, teaching is always evolving. And a lot of us in the art room are noticing shifts in how students approach challenges, especially when it comes to independent work, when it comes to problem solving. But, as Khadijah kind of gave us a reminder, the art room is one of the best places to help students navigate those skills and build those skills. So, whether we're talking about collaboration or how we design our projects or how we give our students choice, we can create opportunities for them to think for themselves, to work through different obstacles, and to grow more confident in their abilities. But thinking about us as teachers at the same time, change isn't necessarily comfortable for us either. And so we have to navigate some of those issues ourselves too, whether we're adapting to new technologies or adjusting to new routines, or just thinking about how our students are acting and what they're doing and how we can best help them and support them. But I think staying open to change really means for us just the idea that we need to remind ourselves that growth comes from that discomfort. Okay? And if we can adapt, and if we can model that adaptability for our students, if we can encourage resilience and be resilient ourselves, then we're able to create the spaces we need where mistakes are embraced. They're part of the learning process. And we can help students develop the mindset that they need, as well as hold ourselves accountable and have that mindset ourselves, of being adaptable, being open to change. And whether that's for our students or that's for us, we're going to be able to navigate whatever changes are coming next. Art Ed Radio is produced by the Art of Education with audio engineering from Michael Crocker. Thank you for joining us for today's episode. We hope it was helpful for you. And if you know someone else who might be helped with the information on this episode, we would love for you to share it with them. We also appreciate all of the ratings and reviews that listeners leave for us. So if you have a few seconds to give us a 5-star rating, or even leave a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen, we would love to see it. We appreciate all of our listeners, and we will talk to you again next week.